Daylight saving time. A summer time is the practice of advancing clocks during summer months by 1 hour so that evening daylight lasts an hour longer, while sacrificing normal sunrise times. Typically, regions with summertime adjust clocks forward 1 hour close to the start of spring and adjust them backward in the autumn to standard time. People use the terms spring forward and fall back when referring to this. New Zealander George Hudson proposed the idea of daylight saving in 1895. The German Empire and Austria-Hungary organized the first nationwide implementation, starting on April 30, 1916. Many countries have used it at various times since then, particularly since the energy crisis of the 1970s. The practice has both advocates and critics. Putting clocks forward benefits retailing, sports, and other activities that exploit sunlight after working hours, but can cause problems for outdoor entertainment and other activities tied to sunlight, such as farming. Though some early proponents of DSD aimed to reduce evening use of incandescent lighting, once a primary use of electricity, today's heating and cooling usage patterns differ greatly, and research about how DSD affects energy use is limited or contradictory. DSD clock shifts sometimes complicate timekeeping and can disrupt travel, billing, record-keeping, medical devices, heavy equipment, and sleep patterns. Computer software often adjusts clocks automatically, but policy changes by various jurisdictions of DSD dates and timings may be confusing. Rationale: industrialized societies generally follow a clock-based schedule for daily activities that do not change throughout the course of the year. The time of day that individuals begin and end work or school, and the coordination of mass transit, for example, usually remain constant year-round. In contrast, an agrarian society's daily routines for work and personal conduct are more likely governed by the length of daylight hours and by solar time, which change seasonally because of the Earth's axial tilt. North and south of the tropics, daylight lasts longer in summer and shorter in winter, the effect becoming greater as one moves away from the tropics. By synchronously resetting all clocks in a region to 1 hour ahead of standard time, individuals who follow such a year-round schedule will wake an hour earlier than they would have otherwise. They will begin and complete daily work routines an hour earlier, and they will have available to them an extra hour of daylight after the workday activities. However, they will have 1 less hour of daylight at the start of each day, making the policy less practical during winter. While the times of sunrise and sunset change at roughly equal rates as the seasons change, proponents of daylight saving time argue that most people prefer a greater increase in daylight hours after the typical 9-to-5 workday. Supporters have also argued that DSD decreases energy consumption by reducing the need for lighting and heating, but the actual effect on overall energy use is heavily disputed. The manipulation of time at higher latitudes has little impact on daily life, because the length of day and night changes more extremely throughout the seasons, and thus sunrise and sunset times are significantly out of phase with standard working hours regardless of manipulations of the clock. DSD is also of little use for locations near the equator, because these regions see only a small variation in daylight in the course of the year. The effect also varies according to how far east or west the location is within its time zone, with locations further east inside the time zone benefiting more from DSD than locations further west in the same time zone. History: although they did not fix the schedules to the clock in the modern sense, ancient civilizations adjusted daily schedules to the sun more flexibly than DSD does, often dividing daylight into 12 hours regardless of daytime, so that each daylight hour was longer during summer. For example, Roman water clocks had different scales for different months of the year. At Rome's latitude, the third hour from sunrise, hora tertia, started by modern standards at 9:02 solar time and lasted 44 minutes at the winter solstice. But at the summer solstice it started at 6:58 and lasted 75 minutes. After ancient times, equal lengths of hours eventually supplanted unequal, so civil time no longer varies by season. Unequal hours are still used in a few traditional settings, such as some monasteries of Mount Athos and all Jewish ceremonies. During his time as an American envoy to France, Benjamin Franklin, publisher of the Old English proverb, "Early to bed and early to rise, makes the man healthy, wealthy and wise," anonymously published a letter suggesting that Parisians economize on candles by rising earlier to use morning sunlight. This 1784 satire proposed taxing window shutters, rationing candles, and waking the public by ringing church bells and firing cannons at sunrise. Despite common misconception, Franklin did not actually propose DST. 18th century Europe did not even keep precise schedules. However, this soon changed as rail transport and communication networks came to require a standardization of time unknown in Franklin's day. Modern DST was first proposed by the New Zealand entomologist George Hudson, whose shift work job gave him leisure time to collect insects, and led him to value after-hours daylight. In 1895 he presented a paper to the Wellington Philosophical Society proposing a 2-hour daylight-saving shift, and after considerable interest was expressed in Christchurch, he followed up in an 1898 paper. Many publications credit DST's proposal to the prominent English builder and outdoorsman William Willett, who independently conceived DST in 1905 during a pre-breakfast ride. When he observed with dismay how many Londoners slept through a large part of a summer's day, an avid golfer, he also disliked cutting short his round at dusk. His solution was to advance the clock during the summer months, a proposal he published 2 years later. The proposal was taken up by the Liberal Member of Parliament Robert Pearce, who introduced the first daylight saving bill to the House of Commons on February 12, 1908. A select committee was set up to examine the issue, but Pearce's bill did not become law, and several other bills failed in the following years. Willett lobbied for the proposal in the UK until his death in 1915. William Sword Frost, Mayor of Orillia, Ontario, introduced daylight saving time in the municipality during his tenure from 1911 to 1912. Starting on April 30, 1916, the German Empire and its World War I ally Austria-Hungary were the first to use DST as a way to conserve coal during wartime. Britain, most of its allies, and many European neutrals soon followed suit. Russia and a few other countries waited until the next year, and the United States adopted it in 1918. Broadly speaking, daylight saving time was abandoned in the years after the war. However, it was brought back for periods of time in many different places during the following decades, and commonly during World War II. It became widely adopted, particularly in North America and Europe, starting in the 1970s as a result of the 1970s energy crisis. Since then, the world has seen many enactments, adjustments, and repeals. For specific details, an overview is available at Daylight Saving Time by country. Procedure. In the case of the United States, where a 1-hour shift occurs at 2 o'clock local time, in spring the clock jumps forward from the last moment of 1:59 Standard Time to 3 o'clock DST, and that day has 23 hours, whereas in autumn the clock jumps backward from the last moment of 1:59 DST to 1 o'clock Standard Time, repeating that hour, and that day has 25 hours. A digital display of local time does not read 2 o'clock exactly at the shift to summertime, but instead jumps from 1 hour 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 9 forward to 3 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. 0 clock shifts are usually scheduled near a weekend midnight to lessen disruption to weekday schedules. A 1-hour shift is customary. 20-minute and 2-hour shifts have been used in the past. Coordination strategies differ when adjacent time zones shift clocks. The European Union shifts all zones at the same instant at 1 o'clock UTC, 2 o'clock CET, or 3 o'clock EET. The result of this procedure is that Eastern European time is always 1 hour ahead of Central European time, at the cost of the shift happening at different local times. In contrast, most of North America's shifts at 2 o'clock local time, so its zones do not shift at the same instant. For example, Mountain Time is temporarily 0 hours ahead of Pacific Time, instead of 1 hour ahead in the autumn, and 2 hours, instead of 1, ahead of Pacific Time in the spring. In the past, Australian districts went even further and did not always agree on start and end dates. For example, in 2008 most DST observing areas shifted clocks forward on October 5, but Western Australia shifted on October 26. In some cases only part of a country shifts. For example, in the US, Hawaii and most of Arizona do not observe DST. Start and end dates vary with location and year. Since 1996, European summertime has been observed from the last Sunday in March to the last Sunday in October. Previously, the rules were not uniform across the European Union. Starting in 2007, most of the United States and Canada observed DST from the second Sunday in March to the first Sunday in November, almost two-thirds of the year. The 2007 U.S. change was part of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. Previously, from 1987 through 2006, the start and end dates were the first Sunday in April and the last Sunday in October, and Congress retains the right to go back to the previous dates now that an energy consumption study has been done. Proponents for permanently retaining November as the month for ending DST point to Halloween as a reason to delay the change, to provide extra daylight on October 31. Beginning and ending dates are roughly the reverse in the Southern Hemisphere. For example, mainland Chile observed DST from the second Saturday in October to the second Saturday in March, with transitions at 2400 local time. The time difference between the United Kingdom and mainland Chile could therefore be 5 hours during the northern summer, 3 hours during the southern summer, and 4 hours a few weeks per year because of mismatch of changing dates. DST is generally not observed near the equator, where sunrise times do not vary enough to justify it. Some countries observe it only in some regions. For example, southern Brazil observes it while equatorial Brazil does not. Only a minority of the world's population uses DST because Asia and Africa generally do not observe it. Politics. Daylight saving has caused controversy since it began. Winston Churchill argued that it enlarges the opportunities for the pursuit of health and happiness among the millions of people who live in this country, and pundits have dubbed it daylight saving time. Historically, retailing, sports, and tourism interests have favored daylight saving, while agricultural and evening entertainment interests have opposed it, and its initial adoption had been prompted by energy crisis and war. The fate of Willett's 1907 proposal illustrates several political issues involved. The proposal attracted many supporters, including Arthur Balfour, Churchill, David Lloyd George, Ramsay MacDonald, Edward VII, the managing director of Harrods, and the manager of the National Bank. However, the opposition was stronger. It included Prime Minister H. Asquith, Christie, George Darwin, Napier Shaw, many agricultural organizations, and theatre owners. After many hearings, the proposal was narrowly defeated in a Parliament committee vote in 1909. Its allies introduced similar bills every year, from 1911 through 1914, to no avail. The U.S. was even more skeptical. Andrew Peters introduced a DST bill to the United States House of Representatives in May 1909, but it soon died in committee, after Germany led the way with starting DST during World War I on April 30, 1916, together with its allies to alleviate hardships from wartime coal shortages and air raid blackouts. The political equation changed in other countries. The United Kingdom used DST first on May 21, 1916. U.S. retailing and manufacturing interests led by Pittsburgh industrialist Robert Garland soon began lobbying for DST, but were opposed by railroads. The U.S.'s 1917 entry to the war overcame objections, and DST was established in 1918. The war's end swung the pendulum back. Farmers continued to dislike DST, and many countries repealed it after the war. Britain was an exception. It retained DST nationwide but over the years adjusted transition dates for several reasons, including special rules during the 1920s and 1930s to avoid clock shifts on Easter mornings. The U.S. was more typical. Congress repealed DST after 1919. President Woodrow Wilson, like Willett, an avid golfer, vetoed the repeal twice, but his second veto was overridden. Only a few U.S. cities retained DST locally thereafter, including New York, so that its financial exchanges could maintain an hour of arbitrage trading with London, and Chicago and Cleveland to keep pace with New York. Wilson's successor Warren G. Harding opposed DST as a deception, reasoning that people should instead get up and go to work earlier in the summer. He ordered District of Columbia federal employees to start work at 8 o'clock rather than 9 o'clock during summer 1922. Some businesses followed suit, though many others did not. The experiment was not repeated. Since Germany's adoption in 1916, the world has seen many enactments, adjustments, and repeals of DST, with similar politics involved. The history of time in the United States includes DST during both World Wars, but no standardization of peacetime DST until 1966. In May 1965, for 2 weeks, St. Paul, Minnesota and Minneapolis, Minnesota were on different times. When the capital city decided to join most of the nation by starting daylight saving time, while Minneapolis opted to follow the later date set by state law. In the mid-1980s, Clorox and 7-Eleven provided the primary funding for the Daylight Saving Time Coalition behind the 1987 extension to US DST, and both Idaho senators voted for it based on the premise that during DST fast food restaurants sell more French fries, which were made from Idaho potatoes. In 1992, after a 3-year trial of daylight saving in Queensland, Australia, a referendum on daylight saving was held and defeated with a 54.5% no vote, with regional and rural areas strongly opposed, while those in the metropolitan southeast were in favor. In 2005, the Sporting Goods Manufacturers Association and the National Association of Convenience Stores successfully lobbied for the 2007 extension to US DST. In December 2008, the Daylight Saving for South East Queensland political party was officially registered in Queensland, advocating the implementation of a dual time zone arrangement for daylight saving in South East Queensland while the rest of the state maintains Standard Time. DS4SEQ contested the March 2009 Queensland state election with 32 candidates and received 1% of the statewide primary vote, equating to around 2.5% across the 32 electorates contested. After a 3-year trial, more than 55% of Western Australians voted against DSD in 2009, with rural areas strongly opposed. On April 14, 2010, after being approached by the DS4SEQ political party, Queensland Independent member Peter Wellington introduced the Daylight Saving for South East Queensland Referendum Bill 2010 into Queensland Parliament, calling for a referendum at the next state election on the introduction of daylight saving into South East Queensland under a dual time zone arrangement. The bill was defeated in Queensland Parliament on June 15, 2011. In the UK, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents supports a proposal to observe SDSD's additional hour year-round, but is opposed in some industries, such as postal workers and farmers, and particularly by those living in the northern regions of the UK. In some Muslim countries, DSD is temporarily abandoned during Ramadan, since the DSD would delay the evening dinner. Ramadan took place in July and August in 2012. This concerns at least Morocco and Palestine, although Iran keeps DST during Ramadan. Most Muslim countries do not use DST, partially for this reason. The 2011 declaration by Russia that it would not turn its clocks back and stay in DST all year long was subsequently followed by a similar declaration from Belarus. Russia's plan generated widespread complaints due to the dark of wintertime morning, and thus was abandoned in 2014. The country changed its clocks to Standard Time on October 26, 2014 and intends to stay there permanently.